As you mentioned, there are a number of programs out there, Dark Eagle, Arrow, Conventional Prompt Strike, HACM. Do you see some or one of the services as further down the road to the kind of conversations that you're mentioning and the kind of openness to collaborate with industry? Are some further along the road than others right now?
Well, of course, I'm most familiar with the Air Force, and I do think that the Air Force is trying to collaborate more with industry. There's always the fine line that you walk. You have to be fair to all parties, so it's not always an easy line to walk. But I do believe both Arrow and HACM have advanced the ball sufficiently where they ought to be ready for production, if not now, very, very soon. And so this would be a perfect example of where the Air Force should be having those conversations with industry.
I really appreciate about this capabilities task force that it's co-chaired by two former service secretaries, yourself and former Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy. You have so much benefit of perspective in the seat that you're sitting in. Can you look back and share some lessons learned? You know, if the services had to do it all over again, what have we learned about jointness when it comes to these programs? What have we learned about execution and the order of steps? If there were do-overs to be had, what would you recommend?
Well, first of all, jointness is something that I think ever since Goldwater Nichols back in the 1980s is something that we have collectively, no matter what administration we've worked on, we've collectively tried to do better and better. And I think the level of jointness in today's military is at an all-time high. And certainly Secretary McCarthy and I came at it from that angle. It requires listening. It requires sometimes compromising on some of what you want to come out with, some of the capabilities. So I do think jointness is at an all-time high. The other lesson that we've collectively learned over the years, and this was certainly repeated in our recommendations and in the spirit of the work that we did together, and that is that we need to get increasingly less burdensome on industry. We need to remove as much of the red tape as possible. We need to look to those commercial practices. We need to simplify, because all of this will help both on the innovation front and on the speed front. And I do think this administration, like every previous administration, is doubling down to try to get that done and to speed things up in the acquisition process generally. Now, they are really making large efforts, and I applaud them for it. And certainly, we made it a point in our commission to go as quickly as we could to develop this report, get it out there so that it could be timely for both Congress and the Pentagon, as well as to come up with actionable recommendations so that it hopefully won't sit on the shelf and gather dust, but rather it'll make a difference to our country and to our defense.
You talked about simplification, always important. Are there moments you look back on in the programs as they developed where you could say, with the benefit of the knowledge and perspective you have now, we should have done this differently or taken a more efficient path, perhaps?
Well, speaking of acquisition in general, I certainly would have wished we would have gotten the OTA, the Other Transaction Authority religion, earlier than we collectively did in the Pentagon. That authority has been around for decades, and it was used a little bit. It's being used a lot more these days. So that is certainly one lesson learned. The same with commercial practices. There have been the ability to use commercial practices and buy in a more commercial way for years and years, but collectively we have been slow to adopt it. Now, there's always reasons for this, Hope. So if you go back in time and how did we get to where we are, there were concerns about competition, there were concerns about quality, there were concerns about scandals that were real, and money was wasted, and there was waste, fraud, and abuse, and so on. So this is how the regulations and laws and so forth were built up over time. All started with good intention, all started for a particular reason, but the totality of the weight that those sorts of things brought upon the system just got to be too much. And so for years now, we've been trying to strip it away. I wish we had done it more quickly.
Something else that stood out to me about the report and its rollout was the conversation about how hypersonic weapons are the new strategic deterrent. There's sort of this perspective that we're not actually going to use our nuclear weapons. It makes it less of a credible deterrent, just because of the weight and and sort of catastrophe that using them would be. Can you, again, this is sort of looking 10, 15 years down the road as nations begin to acquire hypersonic weapons and build them up in their stockpiles. How do you envision they will change warfare? What does it look as nations begin to acquire them and even to employ them?
Well, the definition of deterrence, really, if you peel that back to its core, an adversary, a potential adversary, has to believe that you have the capability and the political will to actually use certain weapons against them. And if they believe it, they hopefully won't start a fight to begin with. So that's the essence of deterrence. So right now, we don't have a deterrent value in our hypersonics capability because our hypersonics have all been in the research and development phase. They have not yet moved to production. So we don't have any of these weapons fielded. We're hurt from a deterrent standpoint at this point because of that. I think we're also hurt from a warfighting capability, the fact that we lack these weapons now. At present, our potential adversaries can put our bases overseas, our allies, potentially even the homeland in some cases at risk because, of course, these weapons are fast, they're lethal, they're very survivable, hard to shoot them down. And if launched against us, it would only give us minutes, vice perhaps hours, to react, meaning would we do a counterstrike? Well, you got minutes to figure it out. Could we possibly move out of the way? Well, you've only got minutes to get it done, you see. So it really does put us at a disadvantage. To field them at scale in our country, first of all, would help us, God forbid we get into a fight, because those weapons would be able to be very useful in what's called the anti-access aerial denial environment, these very complex abilities and sensors and so on that can shoot down aircraft. China, Russia, other potential adversaries have those. These weapons could break through. So it would be very helpful in such a warfare environment. So for both a deterrent value and, God forbid, we get into war, we need these weapons. We also need defense against these weapons. So this plays into Golden Dome. This plays into our ability to be able to, through cyber effects, through electronic warfare, defeat somebody else's hypersonic attacks against us. Now, how will this change warfare in the future? I think warfare will be forever evolving. It will never stand still. So it's very hard to say 20 or 30 years from now, what will this do? I worry more about the near future. I worry more about the next 5 years. What can we, myself, someone like myself who's been in the government, who has certain knowledge, but I'm now on the outside, what can I do to try to still advance the ball in critical ways that will help our country and our allies and our mutual defense in the next 5 years, let's say? I'm going to have to leave it to the next generation to worry about the next 30.